Hello, this is Tux J Smith from Log Farm. I'm going to show you what all the buttons do on the WobbegongXMP level designer. So it's on my desktop, so we'll go from there. XMP version. Well, we want the level designer, so we type Java -jar level designer, and because I'm on Linux, I'm going to add this ampersand so that the command line is released after the application is started. I'm just going to minimize that. If you've seen any of the other videos, you know what these two blocks do. We've got a horizontal and vertical that are added for your convenience, so you don't have to change dimensions if you just wanted to make a block structure. I'm going to save that by pushing the green button at the top here, and we're going to call it test. The level designer automatically adds a .wob on the end of a file name. So it's been saved. Let's start the client. We come back. Java -jar. By default, the WobbegongXMP client will look for a file called startMap.wob. I don't supply any maps, you have to create your own, but by default it will look for a map called startMap.wob, in the same way that a web browser tends to look for a file called index.html. If you want to point it at a specific file, in this case we want it to look for test.wob, we add this extra command line option, map : test.wob. That's it, and now it's going to load the map that we're currently working on. And using the keys to navigate, so that's left and right to rotate. S and D will slide you from side to side. Up and down arrows will move you backwards and forwards. G will make you jump. Space will fire. And the left and right shift keys will make you look up and down. So that's what these two blocks look like in the 3D environment. This is what they look like in the 2D top-down level designer. Let's add a texture to one of the blocks there. So I've right-clicked, got this magenta outline so we know which block we're editing, and I pull down this textures pull down list, but you can see there's nothing in there, it's empty. So let's add some textures. When either the client or the level designer starts, it automatically creates this directory called game.dir if it doesn't exist, and inside there you will find textures, blender, landscape, sounds. These directories are only used by the level designer. The actual client, the game client, does not use the game client does not use these directories. It uses the .wob and the .wob.zip file. Right, I was getting some textures from so in this textures directory there's nothing in there. So I'll navigate my excuse me, my hard disk, and I find a directory, some textures. Control A to select all, Control C to copy, back to the game.dir textures directory, Control V to paste, minimize that, select that block again. From the textures list you can now see a bunch of textures that we just added. I'm going to choose black brick, close, F2 to quick save. Because we've already opened a file, we don't need to tell it what file to save again, so we just tap the F2 because it knows what the file name is. Back on the client, F5 like a web browser to reload that map, and there we are. We can see the block now has texture. It doesn't have any physics, we can walk straight through it, we can't interact with it. So let's just quickly give that block physics, show you how to do that. Right click on it and check the physics checkbox, commit, F2 to save, F5 to reload the map. And now we've got, see, it's got physics, so we can interact with it. Back back to the level designer. This blue thing here is called a billboard. If I right click on it, we can choose a texture to add to it. A billboard is this two-dimensional thing that hangs in the air. It's got width and height, it doesn't have any depth. So we select Cyberpunk 1, F2, F5 on the map. Where are we? There it is. At the moment it's this puny little 1x1 thing. We want to make it bigger, but one thing to note is the image is always facing the viewer, and it just hangs in the air at whatever elevation you tell it to. I'm going to make it bigger, so we right click on it, and I happen to know that this image works at 10x5, so we're just giving it a width and height. Hit the enter key and then commit. F2 to save. On the client we tap F5, and now you can see it's big, it's sort of widescreeny. If you're interested in this particular image, just Google Cyberpunk City and you'll find a whole pile of them there. The other thing we can do, I don't know if I hope I'm not running too quickly here. So there are our blocks, and there's our image. The other thing we can do with the billboard is add text to it. So we'll do that now. I like to add a carriage return just to give it space at the bottom. F2, and text takes priority, and what I mean by that is the texture now just simply becomes a background to the text. It's a bit low, let's make it a bit higher, and this is the elevation I'm talking about. So elevation is currently 2, we're going to make it 4. What did I save? No, I haven't. If you can see at the top left hand corner, I haven't saved, it just says edited. So F2 now I've saved. Back to the client, F5, and there we are, it's hanging a bit higher. We can change the colour of that text by tapping on either that button or this colour thing, and the text is this value is automatically saved in memory. We don't have to click the commit button for the text colour, but you do have to save if you want it. So there we are, the text is now red. This pink button here is loot, it's a game mechanic. So F2 to save, back to the client, F5. Look around, we should find some loot. There they all are. At the top of the screen you'll see yellow text that says remaining loot 9, so if it goes down as we walk over it. So we've got 5 remaining loots. Now the reason why it's a game mechanic is something should happen when, or what I've implemented so far is something should happen when all the loot is gone. Currently if we take away all the loot, the only thing that happens is it doesn't say we've got any loot anymore, we've got rid of it all. We can add a prize, which is you hold the on the grid here, you hold the shift key down and then push the right hand mouse button, and we have this option. These are global map options, so we find this option in the middle that says if 0 loot, show exits. So there must have been loot there in the first place, but if there's 0 loot after we've picked up all the 9 loot there, then the exit to the next map will be visible. So it's like a game mechanic. A prize is you can only move on to the next map after you picked up all the loot, and that's what that check button does. This light blue button here is the map portal. So we use this appears on the map as we walk onto it and we move on to another map. It's a portal to another map. So if I right click this, if we created any other maps they'd be listed here. We've only got this one we're working on. It's editable so that you can type in maps that you plan to make. So I've made this map, and I know that I want this map will allow a user to move on to another map called this, and I can type that in here even if I haven't created it before. Or you can make it a URL, so http://www.logfarm.net. This is my web space. On there I have a startMap.wob, and that will be loaded on that domain. That will be loaded when we walk onto this portal, and then any maps portaled from that start map will also have to exist on that domain. So now so for example, you can imagine going to Coca-Cola and seeing all their products in a map, and then there'll be a portal and you can go and see other products or something on their domain. Okay, I hope that's clear. So let's see what it looks like. F2, F5. I just did an F2 on there. We're doing an F5 on here, and there it is. And it tells you where you're going. That's quite important. We know where we're headed. So off we go. When I created startMap with a capital M.wob on logfarm.net, I added rather a lot of assets and PNGs, so it takes a few seconds to download the .zip file, and at that point you're supposed to have loaded. Thank you. So all these three-dimensional things are Blender objects, and I'll show you how to add those in a second. But so that zip, so the reason why logfarm.net took a few seconds to load was because there's a zip file that is the asset file that is created automatically by the level designer that contains all of these assets, so the JPEG, the PNGs in my case, and the different Blender objects that you can see here, these three-dimensional things. Now, I'll also get back to TestWob. There isn't a portal on my log farm page, so what we have to do is restart the client with that command line again. So I'm telling the client to start test.wob. There it is. So we're now back on our test map. Right, what else? This green thing here is a floor mat, and a floor mat just by default is a horizontal two-dimensional image. F2 to save, F5 to refresh, and by default, if we don't give it a texture or give it any extra dimensions, it will be a 1x1 brown texture. We can give it a texture here, so from our textures list I'm just going to pick this one, floor bricks 3, and because it's horizontal, the only dimensions that matter are width and depth. Height, it doesn't have a height, it's flat, so I'm going to make it 4x4. 4, hit enter, hit the commit, and you can see it's rather large there. And what have we got? If we give, yes, we gave it a texture, so F2 to save, F5, and there it is, floor bricks. We've got 3 floor mats there. We can also turn, let's not do it that one, let's do it with this one here. We can turn that into a spawn point, and that's an entry point for the map, so anyone who enters this map will land here. Commit, and the spawn point has this white rectangle around it. So F2, F5. So we just landed on that map there, that little square there. So if I move further away and then push F5, we will land back on that map. F5, and we're now back on that square. This yellow thing here, yellow button, are just like blocks, effectively, but that you can't resize them. They are what they are. They're whatever size they are, and by default, they are spheres. So I just saved F5. You might think, well, they're not a lot of use as spheres. What would you going to do with them? Well, you can change them into different things. So at the moment they haven't got any physics. You can just look at them. They get that brown default texture. So we pick this one here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add a blender object to it, so it no longer becomes a sphere, it becomes a blender object, just like those on the log farm web page. It becomes a character of some kind. So we go to our blender pull down list and look, we haven't got any, so let's add some. So in our Wobbegong game dir, there's the blender directory, nothing in there. I navigate my hard disk again because I know where there is one, and there it is. I'll just show you what's inside it. It's a directory filled with files, and they're just text files, nothing else. There's a scene, and that's the thing that the game loads, and then that from there it reads all these XML-y sort of files. So let's copy that. And the question is, of course, how on earth do you make one of these blender object things? Well, here's Blender, the application called Blender. It's free, and it's absolutely outstanding, and it has more controls than the Space Shuttle, so it's a lifetime of learning. But you can get very simple things done, as I have, in a quick space of time by just following some YouTube videos, and you'll get some really simple things done, and that's really all you need to get started, and then just spend the rest of your life learning Blender. It's absolutely marvelous. But with this, so the idea is that you have this 3D shape, and you can select many starting point 3D shapes, and you push and pull it just like a piece of clay. So you could make a I think I said before, a can of Coke. You could make a BMW. You could make a Nike shoe. You know, a Christmas cake. You could make anything out of this thing by pushing and pull it, and you end up with this model. And from here, as far in the context of our game, what you would then do is you go File, Export, Ogre, 3D, and you then export, and then it'll give you where do you want to save it, and you just save it into a directory, and you save it into a directory with the same name as the file, as your object. Whatever name you want in there will be a .scene, right? A .scene. You can see here's a .scene, and that .scene file has to be the same name, or the prefix has to be the same name as the directory. I know I'm confusing here, but you can see this says enemy. Well, if I throw in here enemy.scene, so the prefix is the word enemy, so the directory has to be the same name as this prefix here. Phew. Right, so we have it in our game. I come here, I can now select enemy, commit, close. Let's give it some physics just to save time here. We'll give it some physics. F2, back to the game, F5. And there it is. That's all it is. My enemy is this blue crystal, but I can interact with it. It has physics. That's all and goodbye. What's the other thing we can do? We want to make it into an enemy, and that's a game mechanic. So we've committed, F2, back to the game, F5. What's an enemy? An enemy chases you, and once it catches you, there's a penalty, and the penalty at the moment, because it's got physics, it will interact with anything else that's got physics. So loot, for example, in this case. And when it catches you, it sends you back to the spawn point. So if I pick up all these loot, so I've picked up a few loot, our loot count is now 6. When it catches me again, my loot count remains 6. That's important to note. You can shoot it, right? It stuns it for a few seconds, but it's back to its day job in any moment. Right, so bouncing you back to the spawn point, not much of a penalty. So up here we've got this tab called enemy and fire. We can make it go, once the enemy catches you, the penalty is that it will send you to another map. So for example, a death realm, or in this case I'm going to select restart the level, and the enemy for my loot count was 6 before I got caught and after I got caught. Restarting the map will reset the loot count to whatever it was, and it will put any objects that I've busted or blown up back again. The map is literally starts from the beginning. You have to start the level again, and that's a penalty for this particular enemy. I'll show you. F2, so F5. So we're going to pick up some loot if that enemy don't catch me first. Right, so I've stunned him for a second. So we've got 6 loot now. He's woken up, he's coming to get me. And he's gone back to 9. That was the starting point of the loot count. So that's the penalty. That's how enemies are made. And you can have as many enemies as you like, obviously, and they can be any kind of Blender object. Now finally, fire. Add some fire over here. And F2 to save. F5 to refresh the map. And by default, because we haven't given them physics, they are just pretty sparkly things. But we can give them the same penalties to the player as the enemy, and we do that by let's give one of them physics. So we give it physics, and by default, before we give it any other penalties, we do F2, we walk into a fire. So we walk into a fire with physics. I'll find which one it is. This is the last one, obviously. We get that. You've been burned, and return to the spawn point. We can also add to it the thing we did with the enemy. Oh, I'd already added it. I beg your pardon. No, it's the enemy. Here we are. Right, get me fires and me enemies mixed up here. So there's the fire. Physics. You can't make a fire an enemy, but you give it physics, but you can say reset the map, or penalty to send you to a different map. F2, F5. I'll pick up some loot. So now down to 5 loot, down to 4 loot. If I bump into the active fire wherever he is, that one. You see the loot's been reset to 9 again. So same penalties as the enemy. What else can you do? Fire. You can add an extra texture to a fire. At the moment they have that pretty sparkly looking thing, but let's give it that floor mat texture. And we find our fire. Okay. You see it's got the floor mat texture as opposed to the pretty sparkly thing, and we happen to know that floor mat texture fire is the one that's dangerous. Right, there we are. That's pretty much it. I suppose the one final key button is the one at the bottom, and that's new level. If I select this, it will wipe everything off this screen. Do it. See, all gone. And you're now back to, it says on the top left corner, new level. We haven't lost the old map. The old map's still there, and we can open it with the orange button here, or F4. The orange button, the amber button, or F4. So if I do that, and then it's test wob, we open it. There it is. Thank you very much for watching, and I will upload this as quickly as possible. The WobbegongXMP, this whole thing hasn't actually been uploaded yet at the time of adding this video, and it will be shortly, so you won't find it on my webpage just yet, but thank you.